happy spring. I don't think it was spring the last time we did this. So that new energy of rebirth is in the air, and I'm hoping that everyone's enjoying the fact that hopefully the cold white stuff that I have escaped permanently is no longer on your lawns, or if it is quickly melting, and you're very quickly getting into being able to wear shorts and t-shirts all year round. So here we are, as Jeff said, with yet another topic, but a topic that is ever increasingly important to me in a clinical setting and ever increasingly becoming a series of aha moments in understanding the interplay between different aspects of the human body. So I entitled it Secrets of the Second Brain, and I'm hoping there's a secret in there that I can elucidate for you. But I also do just like nice titles, and sometimes I try to make things into alliterations for the sake of, good marketing and easy memory. So today I am going to talk about something that I do think is an underappreciated aspect of what's going on within the gut, because we talk about gut health and there's a lot of assumption on the part of the person talking and also the part of the audience, the listeners. When I'm talking about gut health, and this is a very important realization, I think, for basic human communication, I'm assuming that you know what I mean when I say gut health, and you're assuming what you think I mean when I'm talking about things, unless I explain them more deeply. The reason I wanted to revisit the nervous system is the more I study it, the more I learn about it, and the more I use what I learn in practical aspects of clinical practice, the more success I'm getting in other areas of the body. And today I want to highlight some aspects of gut health that have thrown me for a loop in terms of past clinical things, because as cool as it is to talk about structure and function and anatomy physiology, the practical applications in terms of using products and also being a more effective clinician are really what I would like everyone to take away from this. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the secrets of the second brain. I'm just going to minimize myself so I don't need to look at myself talk so I can focus on what I want to say to you guys. So this is the state of medicine in pretty much, in my opinion, most walks of life. Medicine is in silos. And what I mean by a silo is we are a specialty driven field. And I understand why it's the state of affairs, because being a specialist has a certain cachet when it comes to clout within an industry. From a business perspective, being a specialist is a marketer's dream because you can build a platform surrounding specialty. But the issue becomes the end user's experience if they go to someone who's a specialist for the thing that they think they need to see a specialist for, and it doesn't resolve their issue. And that person, unfortunately, gets passed around the merry-go-round, so to speak, of trying to figure out what's going on with them, because oftentimes the fault with specialty is an incredibly deep aspect of understanding, but not a wide breadth of interconnected understanding as it relates to that specialty. My favorite example is in the classical medical system, an immunologist and a gastroenterologist, unless they're friends at the same country club, probably never compare notes. And from what we all know about the gut immune system, 60% approximately of immune cells reside in the gut. That's an unfortunate state of affairs when it comes to the betterment of health, because even though there are specific body systems, if you notice all of these examples, whatever system we're looking at, they come in the same wrapper. And that's kind of a foreshadowing for what it is I'm going to talk about today, because the health industry has become gut and microbiome, I don't want to say obsessed, but highly focused and driven in terms of media content, published research, therapeutic targets for drugs and supplements, focuses on helping people deal with deep gut related issues. And I think it's wonderful. But when we talk about the gut, we have this narrowing focus too, right? It's this defaulting into a narrowing focus rather than an interconnected aspect of perspective. So in alternative medicine, functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, whatever you want to call it, we espouse this root causative desire. We do root causative, root origin issues. That's how we get people better. But it requires a systems thinking approach that I'm seeing that is slowly becoming less obvious and less prevalent as a Western philosophical aspect is coming in because of how many people are rushing in from other aspects. I think we need to help bring this awareness back to people that we're treating the whole body. We're not treating a system or a condition. So when we think of gut problems, we assume a cause and an effect relationship. If I say someone has a gut issue, if I ask 10 people, the likely reality is those people are going to say the issue in the gut is coming from the gut because what we've emphasized in our understanding of the gut is it's the entirety of all the organs of digestion, the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and the bowel, or the rectum, if you will, or it's the microbiome and it's the immune system. It's the trillions of microbes living in there, coinciding and interacting with the immune cells and the epithelial cells, and it's dysbiosis, it's infections, it's all of these things that are driving the problem that people are experiencing as the symptoms of the problem. But there's something that not many people talk about, and that's why I wanted to talk about this issue, because we become blinded by the biome, and we sometimes forget the thing within the gut sorry, the gut itself and the things within the gut are controlled by things outside of the gut, meaning that the actual digestive system is still being monitored and the organization of its operation is being orchestrated by something outside of it, specifically the brain and the systems of communication. So symptoms within the gut can actually be symptoms of a bigger issue systemically. Sometimes gut dysfunction, and here we can place things like functional motility disorders, things like IBS, which are very different from IBD. While the person is suffering with gut issues, the causative variables of what drives IBS are actually typically outside of the gut. And what we do is we might start chasing these undulating gut issues, focusing in on the gut, running all kinds of diagnostics, but we don't realize we're not seeing the whole picture because in this scenario that I'm presenting, the gut is the symptom of the bigger problem, but it is not the cause. And yes, there are times when a gut issue is of gut origin. We talk about acute infection, food poisoning, a parasitic infection from traveling abroad, any kind of scenario where someone remembers the moment to where the gut issues started and have stayed as a tabletop since then. Most oftentimes, those are gut specific issues, but even that isn't always true because sometimes a very stressful life event can be the thing that onsets dysfunction in the gut vis-a-vis the system that's actually become more compromised. And we do know that the gut is very interconnected in terms of its ability to be dysfunctional and have that dysfunction permeate out through different areas of the body. And we've mapped a lot of these things. So from the lipopolysaccharides and the intestinal dysbiosis, we can look at how that drives metabolic derangement or specific aspects of choline metabolism in the gut can influence cardiovascular dynamics, toxins within in the digestive system and the metabolites that certain bacteria produce can cause kidney and ureter issues, liver dysfunction. The podcast we just recorded talked about the epidemic of non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome, which about 30% of the population in the US has. There's a very strong tie to dysbiosis, the change of the dysbiosis influencing the metabolics of the specifics of the liver and causing insulin resistance in the liver. And then obviously we know talking about the gut-brain axis, things like dysbiosis and additionally short-chain fatty acids can compromise the brain's ability to sustain optimal function, increase inflammation in the brain, dysregulate the nervous system, and cause a whole host of issues. So we know that there's a central influence that the gut can have when it comes to the holistic driver of holistic health issues and chronic disease. I don't think we need to dig into this a little bit more because all of these axes are being mapped. The gut brain axis, it's really the gut blank axis. And this story is pretty easy to tell. If the gut is dysregulated, then all of the axes that depend upon a healthy gut, the communication between the two of them becomes compromised. If there's an H. pylori infection in the stomach, that's going to cause a dysregulation somewhere else. If you have an overgrowth of either bacteria or fungus in the small intestine, you have SIBO or SIFO, that's going to cause a whole host of issues. Same kind of concept in the large intestine. If you have excessive amounts of gram-negative bacteria and there's a leakiness in the lining of the colon, the contents of that, in additional to other toxins getting into the bloodstream, are going to cause a whole host of issues. But this still is leaving out a very important aspect that I think we bypass in terms of our common knowledge of how it relates to how a healthy person operates. So here's a question for you all. How is the body made aware of all of these axes of dysfunction? Like, how does the body have the ability to become sensing and responding appropriately to when there is leaky gut and it has to re-regulate the entire body to compensate for the compromise? Where is this communication happening, and where is the central processing being performed? It's really actually being governed by the brain. And this is why Jeff mentioned before we started recording, we've talked about the gut-brain axis before, and the gut-brain axis is just that. It's an axis of communication between the brain and the central nervous system, and then the gut, which has a multitude of different communication pathways to the brain. So you have communication via the immune system, and that's typically immediate response of cytokines and pro-inflammatory chemicals. You have the vagal nerve system, which is the main route, the highway, if you will, that goes from the 10th cranial nerve and innervates every single organ of digestion all the way through the gut. You have the neuroendocrine system, and other people will know this as the HPA axis. So the typical relationship here is when the gut is compromised, it activates the HPA axis. The body goes into a pseudo fight or flight response to deal with a problem at the expense of the optimal function of your digestive system. Then you have the circulatory system, to which all of the blood that circulates through the gut has to circulate through the rest of the body. And if things are getting into the brain, bypassing the blood-brain barrier, because we've talked about this relationship of leaky gut and leaky brain, the tight junctions of the gut are very similar to the tight junctions that actually envelope the brain, which is above the brainstem, to keep the fragile tissue of the brain free from potential immune irritants. And then we have this thing called the enteric nervous system, which when we talk about the gut-brain axis, there's really two brains here. Now, one is the central processor and the central regulator, that is the brain and the skull. But it's been said that if you snip the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, which is approximately 80 to 100 billion neurons in your gut, still has the ability to somewhat self-coordinate and self-orchestrate to maintain optimal gut function so the body can continue to nourish itself. So the gut-brain axis to me is really only half of the picture, because it encompasses the communication. That's the important part. It's the answer to the question that I posed. It's the communication via the nervous system that allows the brain to really know what's going on, not only in the gut, but the rest of the body. So from the head down, it's the brain down to the gut via the vagus nerve and the HPA axis, and the gut back up via the same pathways, but the contents of what's coming out of a leaky gut scenario in the circulatory system also feed additional feedback to the brain via what's coming in through the immune cells and the microbes and any kind of toxins that the brain is becoming aware of. So what is the brain using the vagus nerve to communicate with? It is this enteric nervous system. And why I want to highlight this is when we talk about the gut, we place so much emphasis, as I said before, on the organs of digestion and the microbiome, but we don't think of the enteric nervous system as really the orchestrator of what maintains function in a healthy gut. And therefore, in my world, anything that's a gut issue becomes an enteric, an autonomic, and ultimately a central nervous system problem, because the body, via its interconnected coordination of action, is trying to remedy the problem that may be chronically perpetuating dysfunction. And over time, that dysfunction is what drives the disease process. And it's easy to see how healthy someone is regulating themselves by knowing the relationship of how their nervous system is actually performing and operating. So in order to do that, we need to do a little bit of a background primer. If all of you know this, let's make it as, good review, because we need to do that every now and again. And if this is new for you, I'm going to make sure that you have a very fundamental understanding of how the nervous system is organized and how it works within the human body. So this is really easy. We have two major branches of the nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which is pretty obvious. It's central to the body. So we're talking about the brain and the spinal cord. We have the second branch of the nervous system, which is called the peripheral nervous system. So this is really easy to remember. The peripheral nervous system is anything else. And we typically have multiple divisions of the peripheral nervous system. So if you look on the right-hand side, if you go from peripheral to the left, where it says somatic nervous system, soma is Latin reference for the body. So the somatic nervous system is the nervous system that innervates all the muscles to allow for motion of the body to happen, as well as things that connect into where the anatomy of the muscles also share. So skin, muscles, joints, ligaments, and you have the afferent signals and the efferent signals. One's going back and one's going to, but they all have to come back to the brain. So the brain is in the know of what the body's doing, moving in space and time. So we're going to focus on the other side, which is the autonomic nervous system. So whereas the somatic nervous system is going out to all the muscles, tissues of movement, the autonomic nervous system typically goes to the internal organs and glands, and that information is carried back up to the central nervous system. So the body is always in the know of what every organ is doing at every second of the day. In every single tissue of every organ, there is an autonomic nerve that sends information to and from the brain, and they're further classified down into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And most people don't know why it's called sympathetic. It's not because it's your, like your grandmother who wants to listen to all your problems, but it is sympathetic to the needs of the body. So the sympathetic nervous system is the one that always predominates when a scenario or a state inside the body changes that requires the body to respond immediately. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Sympathetic is catabolic and energy resource depleting. But it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that the sympathetic nervous system is the one that adjusts how the body's operating to suit the external conditions. So if you go to the gym, you're going to upregulate sympathetic tone because that's actually what's required in order for you to be vigilant in your exercise routine. The parasympathetic system is the one that downregulates. So if sympathetic is catabolic, parasympathetic is anabolic. So after the gym, you come home, you make your smoothie, and you lie down on the couch. That activates the parasympathetic system, which is the rest and recover side. So your body can digest and absorb all the nutrition. It can incorporate all the nutrition that you fed your system back into the tissues to start the rebuilding process. And this is the interplay between the two of them. They're not negative and positive, they're more yin and yang in the sense that one cannot survive without the other and vice versa. But an excessive amount of each without reciprocal action is negative. So the parasympathetic system essentially helps to downregulate and relax the body. Every breath out you take is parasympathetically mediated. Every breath in you take is sympathetically mediated. And a healthy nervous system has a perfect flow back and forth, left and right in everything that you do. So the body is in its optimal state. We could call this homeostasis. If someone is unwell, if the body is in a state of inflammation, in a state of compromise, injured in some way, shape, or form, the sympathetic nervous system is the one that predominates to try to organize a healing strategy. And if that person is able to downregulate themselves appropriately, then the parasympathetic system can put them into a state of relax, a state of less energy utilization, and that person can start to heal. Within the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, this is where the enteric nervous system comes in. So you have the enteric nervous system that is contained within the gut, that is influenced by the two divisions of the autonomic system that I just mentioned. And the enteric nervous system has a few specific functions that are super important, but often overlooked. So an example would be when we think about digestion, people know that protein digestion is mediated by HCl production in the stomach, and then the macronutrient digestion in the small intestine is required by pancreatic enzymes and bile release from the gallbladder. What actually stimulates those processes to happen, and how does the body know how much of which secretion to make? That's down to the role of the enteric nervous system. there are certain branches of the enteric nervous system that hit each internal organ, and based upon the information coming from the organ going back to the brain will send the message back down to the enteric nerves to stimulate the release of saliva when you're chewing food, to stimulate the release of hydrochloric acid, enzymes, bile. And then the next level down will also be that if there is a stress going on within the gut, that information gets relayed to the brain instantaneously, and then the message back down will be to stimulate an appropriate gut immune response, to stimulate the release of antimicrobial peptides from the Paneth cells in the small intestine, to increase the production of mucosal secretions from the goblet cells, to upregulate white blood cell activity via the immune system. Again, this is the job of the enteric nervous system. So it's the role of digestion and also the role of gut immune activity within the body that is mediated by these systems in their communication, but also other things, the sum total of gastric blood flow, making sure that the blood is being sent. So once the food goes through the epithelials, they actually will take that blood to the liver and then first pass filter it, then distribute that nutrition all over the body for energy production. The role of peristalsis and the speed of how fast or how quickly things move through the digestive system is coordinated by the enteric nervous system, as is the ability for the body to release waste. And if anyone deals with chronic constipation, alterations in bowel function, it's super important to remember that this is mediated by a nervous system action. The parasympathetic nerves that come out of the sacral area, the lumbosacral plexus, this is hard for me to say, that's what's going to allow waste material to be removed, which is one of the most fundamentally important things for maintaining good health, is regularly moving the bowels. But these days, so many people deal with chronic constipation and malabsorption. I hope you're now starting to see the picture of how these things are actually interconnected beyond just a gut problem. It's a communication problem. So when we talk about healthy gut function, unless we're also including the actions of the enteric nervous system and then taking that as an acute thing, by acute, I mean considering it locally within the gut, and then spreading that consideration out to more of a holistic body system scenario to consider how well the nervous system is functioning, we're not doing our due diligence as practitioners to consider all things when it comes to those challenges that people are dealing with that no one can understand and resolve. And I encourage everyone to spend a little bit of time diving into the inner layers of both what's called the submucosal plexus and the myenteric plexus. The long and short of what you need to know here from common conversation, if you want to explain to clients, one branch is controlling the contractions and the movement of the muscle to coordinate the speed of how things move through. So not only does the digestive process facilitate its complete breakdown of nutrition, but the absorption process is being optimized because food moving too quickly through the tube bypasses optimal absorption, and you run the issue of malnutrition, whereas food moving too slowly through the tube can actually start to putrefy and ferment. So not only do we not remove waste, do we uptake potential toxins that the body wants to remove, because you have to remember detoxification is very much mediated by bile moving from the gallbladder through the digestive system. But when things become stagnant, it becomes like a buffet for the microbes that are living in our system. So when the muscular system is dysfunctional, the other system, which pretty much relates to the activities within inside the gut that are mediating the management of the internal environment of the microbiome, are also going to be upregulated, because when there's either a deficiency or a stagnation, the internal landscape of the microbiome becomes compromised and the immune system has to become more active. So if you get to know all of these parts and understand what they do, you can start to see how they fit into being able to monitor potential symptom presentations that your clients are telling you about. Or maybe you can look at some aspects of lab diagnostics or something that I'm going to introduce to you today to become better at, I don't want to say diagnosing, but assessing potential scenarios that are going on with your client if what you're working on isn't actually allowing them to get better. So we have to examine this within a clinical practice setting, because this is structure and function based information that you can read in a chemistry textbook or an anatomy textbook. It's useful, but being able to then take this information, relate it to practicality, and spot patterns is really what it's all about. And as research is starting to catch up, we're starting to realize that there's an an additional aspect of consideration when it comes to the gut nervous system, because the nervous system is very interesting. It monitors the sum total of the information going on inside of us and the sum total of the information going on outside of us that we're experiencing is what we call reality. And why this system is so important is because this is the one system in the body that deals with the crossover of physical and non-physical stuff. So psychological stuff is very much a nervous system translated scenario for someone. What I mean by translated is if someone experiences a traumatic event, their nervous system is actually what's experiencing that, and their physiology is what's responding. And this is why sometimes people have scenarios of PTSD, which have a physiological ramification for that person, because if the nervous system is fragmented or dysregulated, then the communication from the nervous system to all of the internal organs follows suit. And that's why so many people who have digestive issues also have psychological and emotional things that are either driving the scenario, are part and parcel of the scenario, or are created as a result of what they're experiencing going on in their guts. So I want to put that on everyone's radar because it's also important to consider when it comes to how do you treat such things. And this is something that I've seen in my practice, and I'm sure everyone else will agree. Since COVID, I see so many more psycho-emotional stress scenarios accompanied with people's digestive issues, which are causing a reduction in the quality of life. And as health practitioners, our job is to help people find their way back to health. And you're not going to do that by studying disease. No one ever figured out health by more deeply studying disease. They figured out health by helping the body get back to an operating system that it's ideal for that body. And so much of what we're dealing with physically has a non-physical correlation. And I think the gut's a very sensitive area for this. So I wanted to put that on everyone's radar. And when it comes to my world, and I think this is something that's fair to say, or at least make a claim, all digestive issues are enteric nervous system issues. Why? Because it is the enteric nervous system that is relaying that information back up to the brain to allow the person to know that something is not going well within their gut. So what we're trying to do is if the body's stuck in a stress state of dysregulation, the sum total of all of our interventions, diet, lifestyle, sleep, rest, stress management, exercise, so on and so forth, our goal is allowing, no, let me say that again. Our goal is to harmonize all of these interventions so that the body can receive that information and re-regulate back to a more optimal state of operation and resolve the potential laundry list of symptoms or issues that the person may be presenting. So I want to give you all an example or a few examples of things that I've experienced that showed me how important it is to connect these things because the first line of defense of what I did didn't necessarily resolve the issue like I thought it would. So here's the first one. 54-year-old female and was diagnosed with dysautonomia multiple years ago. So for those who don't know, dysautonomia is a blanket statement of something in the nervous system is just not operating optimally. They don't know why, they don't know exactly how, but the person is experiencing a multitude of weird symptoms experientially in their body and oftentimes is accompanied by digestive stress. So this person has a negative relationship with digestive issues as it relates to her condition. Every time she starts to feel a little weird inside of herself, she gets anxious. And what ends up happening is her guts become a little compromised. When she gets constipated, it really stresses her out. So she uses a suppository to encourage evacuation. This is when everything goes to SHI, you know what, pun intended, because what the suppository did was cause her to feel horrible, exhausted, hyper anxious, and very, very mentally defeated. So the post experience of using a suppository to help evacuate her bowels created a whole host of problems. And then ever since that day, her digestive system became super erratic and it was stuck in this state of abnormal evacuation, accompanied with a multitude of digestive issues, bloating, further constipation, diarrhea, so on and so forth. So you might look at this and you might say, well, just give her a probiotic, give her a digestive enzyme to support her gut. That was given, and it still didn't resolve the issue. What was the pattern at play? The body got traumatized by forcing the digestive system to do something it didn't want to do. And most people don't think of things this way. When there's a constipation, the body is not wanting to constipate itself. And I know constipation isn't optimal, but in this scenario, overriding what the body wanted to do violated the gut nervous system in the scenario, and it caused the whole body to go into a fight or flight setting. And not until this person was actually able to be calmed down and talked through the scenario with additionally making some diet changes, using a digestive enzyme and some other things to make sure that she's properly breaking down her food, was she able to get out of the fight or flight scenario and get her system back into a state of more optimal regulation so it was calm again and she broke the cycle. This is a scenario where, unless you understood the interplay between the autonomic nervous system, the enteric nervous system, and the gut, you would be chasing symptoms and chasing scenarios and going from doctor to doctor, looking at different biological and functional tests, not getting any answers, but the person would be getting progressively more stress as time went on. Second one, 28-year-old male, no diagnosed condition, avid weightlifter. This one, this one confused me for a couple months. So he had no major issues, but he had some digestive issues with no specific patterns. They would come or go, except every morning he would wake up and he would aggressively empty his bowels on the before he would go to the gym, and it would compromise his energy in the gym. He would push through the workout, go about his day, and the cycle would repeat. No one could figure this out, and it was even more confusing because he had a very regimented diet plan, which is bodybuilding style, same breakfast, same lunch, same dinner every day, very macronutrient calculated. Um, and he was a healthy guy. He had regular exercise patterns. He would go for a multitude of these scans. Everything came back normal. As I got to know him, I got to know a little bit more about him, and I realized that his system was quite stressed from a psychological perspective. And his trainer had told him the best thing to do to wake up, or when you wake up rather, is to drink a half liter of water first thing in the morning. So he was chugging ice cold water, which was shocking his gut. It was throwing his gut nervous system into a stress pattern. And it was that massive amount of cold water in the morning because his system was already pre-activated, if you will, that was causing his issues. And again, no one can figure this out, but unless you started to figure out, oh, what he was doing is he was overstressing his system first thing in the morning, we removed the cold water, everything went away. Very simple. And he was on digestive enzymes and everything prior to this, nothing was resolving the issue. Final case, 41-year-old female, no diagnosed conditions, but very sensitive to the world around. One of those classic empath personality types. Chronic complaints of digestive issues, bloating, constipation, always accompanied with low energy. The one interesting thing was there was a past neck injury where they actually landed on their 10th cranial nerve. And for those who don't know their anatomy, the 10th cranial nerve is the outflow of the vagus nerve right before it starts to innervate every organ within the torso. So the past issue of the neck injury was an insight. And the patterns that would come, this person would have coffee on an empty stomach, it would trigger this anxiety and dramatically enhance bloating. And this, and accompanied with past patterns of eating disorders, would cause a very bad swing of chronic constipation to normal bowel movements and chronic constipation back and forth. And occasionally the use of a laxative teas were required so the person could actually go to the restroom. Again, digestive enzymes have been tried, all kinds of probiotics, all kinds of different gut-based supplements. But the pattern at play was their system wasn't actually able to deal with the morning stimulation of caffeine. And anytime they got overwhelmed, their nervous system would go into a state of fight or flight, and it would shut down the parasympathetic system's ability to help bring them back down to a more calm state of operation. So again, unless you understand the interplay of how the digestive system here was just following the overall state of how the nervous system was operating, you would never figure this one out by throwing a multitude of different gut supplements at the person, hoping that they would fix the problem. Not to say that they won't help the problem along the way, but you want resolution as a practitioner when dealing with a client. You don't want to just manage a scenario in hopes that they're okay with living in some sort of state of compromise. And this was the original inspiration for this whole thing because I'm sure we've all been here. What happens when you finish the protocol and you take the supplements away from the client and the symptoms return. Or even worse, you have crafted a protocol and they don't even do really anything all that beneficial. Because again, this is the limitations of looking at the digestive system only within the lens of the digestive system, not considering a bigger picture. So this is where my encouragement for where the knowledge of how body systems are interconnected and how you can learn from this and have the ability to know how to use supplements for one area of the body to affect potentially another area of the body when these scenarios are needed. To then know also how to synergize healing strategies to help shift regulation status or states, i.e., a supplement protocol plus dietary changes, some lifestyle strategies, maybe some modalities that help to teach the person to regulate their nervous system through breathing or some sort of energy technology. All kinds of things are coming out nowadays. And the third level is to consider and understand that the deeper art of healing, where physical meets non-physical, always has to be a consideration because a person is not just simply a meat suit. They are a person as a physical self, a mental self, an emotional self, so on and so forth. So you can use these things as a first line of defense. You can use the digestive aids when someone is struggling from a GI perspective, because unless they have a negative response to things, there's one fair assumption you can always make when someone's physiology is in a crisis state, is that they're not going to be making the adequate amount of digestive secretions that they require. The stomach is going to be downregulating its production of HCl, or it's going to be making HCl that is not acidic enough to properly denature proteins. We know how that story goes. The same is true of the pancreatic exocrine function, where if they're not going to be digesting properly, they're likely going to be deficient in pancreatic enzymes. So the process of digestion becomes more of a process of fermentation, promotes small bowel overgrowth, promotes potentially the accumulation of a fungal infestation, promotes the fermentation of such foods, the overgrowth of dysbiosis, and the lack of nourishment of the person, which is most important of all because a person in a state of crisis not only needs more energy to sustain their stress state, but they need energy so the body can heal in the first place. If digestion is compromised, then you go to the microbiome aids. Obviously, Theralac Pro is our go-to probiotic because of what it can do beneficially in the small and the large intestine, but using other strategies too, cleanzyme, or even going outside the portfolio to use certain herbs help the person manage potential overgrowth, dysbiosis. But when you go beyond the gut microbiome and you still don't know necessarily where to go, you have to think about how do you assess the state of regulation of a person, and this is where diagnostics come in. Stool tests, what we talked about a few months ago, can be wonderful. And I hit on this in the presentation. I think you can actually get a sense of where someone's major issues are, at least from a patternistic perspective, from a stool test. If they have pancreatic elastase deficiency, they probably have somewhat of an enteric nervous system stress. If they have high levels of a gut immune response, again, or an infection response, that's going to cause some sense of enteric nervous system response. That person's body is going to be in some sort of state of fight or flight. So what I do is I actually then use an autonomic nervous system test, which most people know as heart rate variability, because I can see just how stressed someone is. And you can know how these patterns can potentially relate to the patterns of symptoms that the person is presenting, but also how much capacity they have for healing. This slide is going to look like absolute Greek to all of you, but when you start to see how someone's autonomic nervous system is being regulated through their heartbeat, you can see that if someone is in a healthy state, but they're just dealing with a bit of an acute stress, that's an easy thing to deal with. If someone's on the left-hand side here, for example, that's someone whose system is totally dysregulated, so they need to be rebuilt from the inside out physically rather than simply going after the symptoms. Their body is in a state where it is unable to heal and they're stuck in a chronic state of fight or flight. This is where the talk comes back to supplements that are useful for the gut, but outside the gut. And within our portfolio, we have two main things that we're promoting for the month that help the nervous system either downregulate its degree of vigilance from a perspective of fight or flight, or help manage the pro-immune response that comes from neurological inflammation, which will cause a series of communication dysregulation issues, not only in the brain and the central nervous system, but through the autonomic, the peripheral, and the enteric nervous systems. So the first one we can get into is suntheanine. And theanine is a wonderful supplement for a multitude of reasons. There's almost no, there actually are not any known negative interactions, and it's a supplement that you can dose at a really high level, best taken on an empty stomach without any rather negative consequences. I personally like to use theanine before bed because what theanine's main job is it helps the body upregulate the internal production of GABA. So GABA is short for gamma aminobutyric acid. And what GABA does is it plays an antagonist role to glutamate in the neurons of the brain. Glutamate is excitatory. So when someone is overly stimulated, when they're eating certain kinds of foods, when they're essentially riding the adrenaline train, the brain is taking in a lot of information and the neurons are in a state of excitation, which is a glutamate dominant state. It is very hard for the body to downregulate and turn off in a glutamate dominant state. All of that rhymes, interestingly. So what you want is to promote an internal production of GABA. You can supplement GABA, but the limitations of GABA supplementation supposedly is it's a large molecule, so it doesn't have the ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. But theanine has the ability to internally upregulate the production of GABA within the neurons of the brain, thus giving the nervous system an alternate state of operation, and the person experiences a downregulation of vigilance, which is basically expressed as the ability to feel more relaxed. So by helping the brain relax, you can help the body relax as a result of its ability to help downregulate a fight or flight like operating system. Am I saying that a single dose of theanine is going to take someone out of a chronic state of crises that they've been in for 10 years? No, but it is something that helps along the way. And by downregulating the perception of stress in the brain, the body can get out of that chronic sympathetic dominance, pushing the body more into a state of being able to get back into healing anabolism via the parasympathetic nervous system and activity of the vagus nerve. Suntheanine pairs very well with Sunbalance, which has a different mode of action to hopefully get to somewhat of a similar response. So where suntheanine's working on the neurological side of neurotransmitters, Sunbalance is helping to attenuate immune stress within the brain. The histamine response is something that typically results from what's called mast cell activation. And anytime you have mast cell activation in the body, you have an immune system that's been incredibly agitated and perturbed. And histamine is actually a neurotransmitter, but it's one that's more of a warning neurotransmitter that directs the activity of the immune system to deal with whatever threat might be present. So we can have a histamine response in the brain as a result of gut issues, as a result of something locally within the brain, or we can just have a histamine response systemically because something in our environment or something in our bodies is causing our immune system to basically call to action and request help from the white blood cells. So unlike suntheanine, which has almost a limitless dose profile, although I wouldn't suggest you take 20 capsules a day, it's probably a point of diminishing return. It also gets very expensive. The ideal dose of Sunbalance is to take 3 of these a day with food, because the main compound PEA is actually a fat-derived substance. So making sure that it's being absorbed properly through digestive channels to make sure it gets into your bloodstream is optimal. And then the combination of luteolin and quercetin are 2 antioxidants that help downregulate the pro-immune action of systemic inflammation within certain parts of the body and specifically the gut. So the relationship here is brain inflammation drives dysfunction in the body always, but especially in the nervous system, because remember, as I said before, the brain is the central organ that is overseeing, coordinating, and regulating all of the activities of all of our internal organs every second of the day. So if the brain is inflamed, its ability to be accurate and precise with sending the appropriate signals back down to the body theoretically can become compromised. So using these two in combination with your first line defense of digestive support is really our best way forwards of helping to deal with gut issues, not only locally within the gut, but also helping to consider the influence of the central, autonomic, and enteric nervous systems, in addition with all the other aspects of treatment that I mentioned before, because fundamentally, Supplementation is an important piece of the puzzle, but it is not the entirety of the puzzle itself. So the final words for all of you gut warriors, I'm hoping that this very short, I would love to do this as a 3 hour long examination, but this very short expose of the enteric nervous system has allowed you to get a greater sense of considering what isn't talked about a lot, in my opinion, in order for you to master the gut, because you have to know everything that's involved. You can understand the microbiota, you can understand the gut immune system, you can understand the epithelial cells, but all of that is coordinated by the enteric nervous system, all of which is regulated by the central nervous system. And if we don't understand the neurological aspect of this, we're not really being complete in our thought process. Second thing is gut issues can be local or peripheral. And it's important to remember that where there is a local problem, it becomes a peripheral problem. If it's driven by a peripheral problem, it eventually becomes a local problem. What I mean by this is if someone has digestive issues as a result of some sort of physical trauma, psychological issue, if the gut becomes dysfunctional as a result of the insult, the internal environment of the gut, because it's dysfunctional over time, will become problematic. So dysbiosis is just a short, hop, a skip, and a jump away. If the local issue of dysbiosis is sustained, it then will cause systemic issues because the body will have to be in somewhat of a state of crisis all the time until the local issue is healed. It's a bidirectional feedback loop. Third thing to consider, when first line supplements don't work, i.e., you've tried the digestive enzymes, you've tried the HCl, you've tried the probiotics, and you don't get those easy wins that we talk about, you need to broaden your approach. Every issue in the body is really a systemic problem. And the good clinicians know how to read the patterns of the body and work with giving the body what it needs to regain energy in order to heal. Sometimes that is working locally within the digestive system, but oftentimes it takes a more broad approach that needs to be harmonized with what it is you decide to use as your modality of treatment. Fourth thing is diagnostics can be very useful and give beneficial insights, but sometimes you need to use additional assessments or rely upon being able to identify the patterns of additional assessments and their usefulness in making your case of understanding what's really going on. What I mean by that is if you're using functional medicine labs, you can gain insights as to what's going on within the test and maybe make some inferences based upon how good your knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry are system-wide. But if you're not getting a gauge of how someone is operating via some sort of physiologic assessment like HRV, for example, or you don't understand how to take in the information of what the client experiences and build a story for them around understanding why their body is choosing to operate a certain way, why symptoms are choosing to be manifested, and how those things come together in order for you to be able to assess the bigger picture of what's going on, then it's of limited use potentially if you've tried to treat the person and your treatments haven't been successful first go around. And the last area I think is really important for all of us in health who consider a holistic bias in terms of how we treat people. The non-physical aspects of the person can be drivers or contributors of gut dysfunction. And if what you're trying to do to help their gut is not working, you've gone as deep as you can, consider diversifying not only your service offerings of what you can provide them, think about collaborating with other professionals so you can become synergists in approaching the person as a physical individual and as also a non-physical individual, because when you resolve things that are psychological or emotional problems, the physiology always gets better because it can allow itself to get out of crisis. So as always, I want to thank all of you for being here. I hope this information was useful. I would love to dive into this stuff as often as possible because there's so much benefit and there's so much opportunity in helping people now more than ever manage their nervous systems because the pace of life in the Western world, the amount of stress we're placing upon ourselves, but that's also placed upon, dare I say, expected of us, is really changing what normal means for the average person. And what I mean by normal is accustomed and accepting of being stressed as a normal operating system without the understanding of the collateral damage to the physiology that shows up when the body can no longer take the stress that it's chronically being subjected to is going to be something that's going to need to be a focus in the next 5 or 10 years. So if there are any questions, we can have some time for some Q&A. And I hope everyone has a good rest of the day otherwise.